Shabbat Shalom. My name is Yisrayl Hawkins, and I had to send me forever as a priest is starting very soon. It's now time to start Friday this week for Sabbath services. Shalom everyone, my name is Abelin, and I like to serve you as a priest starting very soon. Now it's a pleasure and honor to the daughter of Yisrayl, Abel, Sarah.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is daughter of Yisrayl Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you however as a priestess starting very soon. I'd like to read to you Isaiah 2:2. It will come to pass in the last days, the mountain promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. Are you ready? I know someone who is. It is a privilege and honor to turn over to our first speaker, daughter of Yisrael, Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. My name is daughter of Yisrael, Abigail, and my title today is There is No Doubt This is the Time Period of the Great Gathering. In Isaiah 2:2-3, it reads, It will come to pass in the last days that the mountain... Now, is this the mountain they're talking about? No. It's talking about this mountain, the house of Yahweh. So the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. This has to be the chief that they're talking about, right? Okay. This is the chief of the nations. The United States of America. Okay, so let's start over. It will come to pass in the last days that the mountain, the promotion of the house of Yahweh, will be established in the chief of the nations. It has tape on that. Can you tape it up there? And it will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. And many people will go and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh. Remember the house of Yahweh? To the house of the Father of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. Because out of Zion will come forth the law and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. Many people have gave us examples and proof of the great gathering being in our time period. Pastor himself has taught us many scriptures, like in Zechariah chapter 6 and 5, Jeremiah 23, and Revelation 7, that there will be a great gathering of people in these last days, guided by Yeshua, our high priest over the house of Yahweh, and established by the two witnesses, now led by the one sent, whose name is the branch. But you don't have to take my word for it. Yisrayl Hawkins has shown us scripture upon scripture, proving the time period we live in is these last days, and showing us this great gathering is also coming to pass. In closing, let's read Pastor's words in the 11th Book of Yisrayl, Part 1, Chapter 23, verse 92. It says, in Daniel 12:10, many will be purified and made white and tried. That is the gathering of Yahweh's people, the gathering to Yahshua that we talked about, that this last time I spoke about, the gathering that's taking place right now by his house. I will establish my house, and it will bring perfection to the world. And of course, there will be a great gathering taking place, gathering to Yahshua at this time that we're in right now. That's what we're doing. We're doing that work that was prophesied, a great gathering. There's no doubt, sisters, this is the time period of the great gathering. Please enjoy the rest of the speakers as they continue bringing forth more information on this great gathering. And now I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom. My name is daughter of Yisrayl Hawkins, and I would like to serve you forever as a priestess starting very soon. You may be seated. Today I would like to compare people and flowers. Flowers grow in every part of the world. They are all beautiful in their own unique way. And even though there are thousands and thousands of varieties, none are exactly the same. One thing they all have in common is that Yahweh created them. May I please have my first slide? The title of my speech today is Yahweh is Gathering a Beautiful Bouquet. At the Seder meal, every table has a bouquet of flowers. I looked up the word bouquet. It means a group of flowers that are picked and often tied together, flowers picked and fastened together in a bunch. Just like we are picked by Yahweh and fastened together to the branch. I think the most beautiful bouquets are the ones with a variety of colors, shapes, sizes, and smells. Imagine if you could choose flowers from all over the planet to place together into a beautiful bouquet to set on your table for your Sabbath meal. Flowers such as dahlia from Mexico, the lotus flower from India, the chiconia from Trinidad and Tobago, the cherry blossoms from Japan, the blue bonnets from right here in Texas, the golden wattle from Australia, the tropical orchid from Kenya, the forget-me-not from Alaska, the spring squirrel from Ireland, the trillium from North America, and the hibiscus from Hawaii. Wouldn't that be the most gorgeous bouquet? This is what Yahweh is doing. He is gathering people with the help of you and me. Deuteronomy 31, verse 12. Gather the people together, men, women, children, and the strangers within your cities, so they may listen, and so they may learn to reverence Yahweh your Father by carefully observing and doing all the words of this law. He is picking them, not with scissors or shears, but with Yisrayl Hawkins' teachings through the television. People are being gathered and drawn from every country by the prophetic word, newsletter, satellite, internet, and more. When Yahweh is finished gathering his people, he will have the most beautiful bouquet set before him. May I please have my last slide? We, the house of Yahweh, and those Yahweh has gathered, are going to be set on his table in the most beautiful bouquet in all of history. And now I turn it over to the next speaker.
And now I'd like to turn it over to the queens of the house of Yahweh.
Shalom. You may be seated. Today we're speaking about the greatest gathering that is going to take place in the history of mankind. And Yahweh is gathering people to a place of protection in the midst of a very troubled world. In Micaiah 4:1 it says, "But in the last days it will come to pass that the mountain, promotion of the house of Yahweh, will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it." We're familiar with that scripture, right? Are all nations here yet? No, and I want to tell you a little story. Back in 1988, when I first came to the house of Yahweh, we had services, and we were in the old press room where the press room is now, and there weren't very many of us. And when Pastor would read these prophecies and talk about all these people coming to the house of Yahweh, I looked around, and remember, there was no internet in every home back then. So I kind of thought, how is Yahweh going to pull this off? And I couldn't even fathom how this was going to take place. And I never doubted the prophecies, but I always thought, is it going to be some kind of magical thing? Or like, well, how is this going to occur? Then we had the internet. But even still, do you sometimes have a hard time picturing 2 billion people coming to this place? Sometimes it's a difficult thing for our mind to imagine. But I want to give you a little scenario. I looked up the top 10 largest gatherings that have taken place in history. And this is going to surprise you because these all came to one location. Number 10 was the Mecca pilgrimage in 2012, and there were 3 million people gathered in one place. Can you imagine 3 million people here? I mean, not really yet, but it's going to take place. The 9th one, and this is probably going to date me a little bit, a Rod Stewart concert. I know. 3.5 million people came to that concert in 1994. 3.5 million people to hear some silly guy singing? Now think about how many people are going to be flowing to the last witness when they have lost all hope and they know that we're the only ones that can offer salvation in these last days. Can you see it kind of coming to pass now? If 3.5 million people would come and listen to some man singing, you know 2 billion people are going to be coming here to Yahweh to learn of his ways, right? The 7th one, number 7 on this list, was the World Series, and this just took place in 2016. The Cubbies. Now I'm from Chicago, not into sports at all, but the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. And did you know that 5 million people came to the Chicago, Illinois area for that parade? 5 million. Okay, now I'm starting to see that this could really, wow. You can pack a lot of people in if it's something that they want to do. And when all hope of life is gone and we are that only hope, they're coming. They're coming by the millions. Now, number 5 on this list was Pope Francis. Now, he was in Manila in 2015, and did you know that 6 million people came to see that man? Now, I know one wiser than Pope Francis. Okay? So if 6 million people could come see the Pope, how many million people could come over to see our overseer? And remember, they're coming over to you. Now, the number 1 was actually 30 million people all coming to one place. 30 million. And it was the pilgrimage in India in 2013. So I want to kind of give you a little thing, because even with all that, and even seeing that millions of people can be gathered in one place, sometimes it's difficult to really get it in your mind. And when I started answering the phones for the House of Yahweh way back in the day, in the way back time, yes, telephones were invented back then. I couldn't see it because we didn't have very many calls back then. They were very few and far between, and they would only say things like, I found out that the Sabbath day was on Saturday. Can you send me some literature? Or, wow, I just read an article that you have in the Thrifty Nickel, and The Creator has a name. Can you give me a little more information? Now I'm going to fast forward almost 30 years later. Still answering these phones, but the phone calls are coming in big time now, sisters, big time. But they're not saying, I heard about you, I need information about the Sabbath, I heard about Yahweh's name, can you send me some info? You know what they're saying now? I'm ready to move there. I'm ready to become a part of this work. And I say, wow. So it's not like, can you send me some literature? It's like, I've been studying with you people, is what they say. I've been studying with you people for years. I need to know how to move there. I need to know what I need to do. I need to become a part of this work. Just yesterday, someone from Hong Kong and someone from Tokyo asked to join our morning Skype classes. I was like, wow. These are really from all nations. We have India, we have Hong Kong, we have Tokyo, we have Mexico, we have the United Kingdom, we have Nigeria, we have Ghana, we have Zambia. I don't even want to leave anyone out, but you know who you are because you've been calling. And they're coming over to us. So can you see now that this is a possibility? And with the internet, they already they're already here. Wave to them. They're watching today. They are seeing what we're doing here, and pretty soon they're going to have the courage to make that call as their nations fall apart and say, how can I get there? How can I move there? How can I be one of the gathered remnant in these last days? Now today we've got some speakers that are going to be talking about the gathering, this great gathering that Yahweh's doing in this time period. And without any further delay, I'd like to introduce the first of our speakers.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. My title is The Beginning of the Great Gathering. Imagine being the one sent who was given instruction to take about 3 million people to keep the Feast of Yahweh. Not only that, but you have to implore a king and ask that he let Yahweh's people go. But he refuses. So the 10 plagues come upon the land, including water turned into blood, flies, cattle disease, hail, boils, and finally death of the firstborn of every person and animal of the king's people, just to name a few. After suffering all these plagues, the king finally lets you and your people go to keep the feast. You probably know what I'm talking about by now. This was the great gathering that occurred in Moshe's time when he led the children of Israel out of Egypt. This was an amazing time period, when not only did the plagues come upon Egypt, and Yahweh showed the people his power by protecting the children from suffering 7 out of the 10 plagues and dividing the Red Sea so they could cross on dry land to get away from the Egyptian army. But then Yahweh also destroyed that army by commanding the sea to go back together. Have we ever seen anything like that occur in this time period? No. But Yisrayl Hawkins has taught us that the gathering in these last days is going to be even more amazing. Let's look at a quote from the 13th Book of Yisrayl, Part 2, Chapter 20, Verse 22. It says, "Well, if you know the scriptures now, you know that Yeshua, the Lamb who Yahweh prophesied to die to pay for the sins of the people, he is here showing to be the leader of this great gathering. This is a great gathering that Yahweh says is going to be like the days of Moshe, but it's going to totally outdo that, and the people will no longer be saying, well, let's turn over to Yeremiah. They'll no longer be referring to the time when Moshe brought the children out of Egypt, but this is going to be greater still, and everyone in these last days' house is being listed as part of this great work." Yes, Moshe's work, bringing out 3 million people, was a pretty big gathering, but the greatest gathering we know is taking place right now. And I'm going to show you when it began. In the 15th Book of Yisrael, chapter 15, dated 5/25, 2015, At the Feast of Pentecost, Pastor made it crystal clear how this gathering got started. Starting in verse 13, it says, "Now what I want you to rehearse here just a moment in verse 3. He says, 'But I will gather the remnant.' Now I brought a lot of information on the remnant. We are the remnant. We're it. It's for the last days. This is Jeremiah 23, verse 3. He says, 'But I will gather. I, Yahweh, will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them.'" Now he's not talking about you directly, but indirectly. He was talking about you being the substance of this great gathering. It's a great gathering that's going to take place. Did you understand what he said here? This didn't start with us being gathered first. Let's continue reading verse 14. Revelation said it started with a woman who fed and nourished a male child. And we know this is speaking of Maggie May and Buffalo Bill Hawkins. And got him ready for a 3.5-year work during darkness, great darkness, that would engulf the earth to fulfill this. Now that's how it started in the last days. But before that, as Zechariah chapters 5 through 6 said, when he was talking about the two witnesses, and one asked, "Where are you going with this book of Yahweh that brings perfection? This book of perfection that you're bringing to the earth?" And he said, one of the witnesses was actually foretold as talking to Zechariah. Who do you think that was? Yes, Yisrayl Hawkins, saying, "We're going to a Babylonish land not yet established, and there we're going to create the house of Yahweh." They're going to establish the house in this Babylonish land that is not even established yet. Pastor continues in verse 15. America was the only land that was not established at that time. It hadn't become Babylonish, so that had to be developed in history. Now this is where Pastor starts explaining what he said earlier about us being gathered indirectly. He says, Yahweh had to bring certain people here who were our ancestors. Where did your ancestors come from? Most people don't even know. I ask them that and they shrug and say, "I just don't know." Well, no one ever mentioned to you when you were a child where your ancestors actually originated? America was only established a few years ago. Yes, that's true compared to the rest of the world. The United States declared its independence on July 4th, 1776. That was only 240 years ago. Other countries have been in existence for thousands of years, like Egypt and Israel. So getting back to Pastor's words. America, there was no one here. People were fleeing for their lives because they were being gathered. Now, usually when people are fleeing for their lives, it's because they're running away from danger, like war. But Pastor tells us people were fleeing their lives because they were being gathered. Did you hear that? Those who escaped the nations were being gathered here in this land. That's what this is speaking of right here in Jeremiah. Now, if we think about what Pastor has been teaching us the last few weeks about people fleeing for their lives, we can see the similarity in the refugees of today and those of this time period when America was being created just a few years ago. In verse 16, Pastor's reading Jeremiah 23, verse 3 to us. He says, Jeremiah 23, verse 3, "But I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them." That gathering took place years ago because it had to become a Babylonish land, and then it had to become the greatest nation on the face of the earth. The chief nations. Remember the prophecy in Isaiah? In the last days, I will establish my promotion. I will establish my promotion. That promotion is going out now to all the world. And remember, the first speaker showed us where that promotion is established, in the United States of America. Now notice verse 17 makes this crystal clear, as only the one sent can do. Well, in these last days, remember the last days, because that's what he's talking about here. In the last days, I'm going to gather my remnant. Gather my remnant. Well, he's already gathered your ancestors to this land. They're the ones that gave birth to you, and then Yahweh brought you to his house. So this great gathering has taken a few years to take place and mature. But it has matured to this point where the two witnesses did establish the house of Yahweh in this Babylonish land called America. And we have been gathered to the place to take part in the rest of this great gathering that is going on right now. So to hear more about this great gathering, please stand and welcome up our next speaker.
Shalom, great saints of Yah, you may be seated. Today the title of my speech is The Two Great Gatherings, but the Kingdom of Yahweh Will Prevail. You probably don't think about this, but there are now two great gatherings taking place side by side at the same time in these last days. One gathering is bringing together the kingdom of Yahweh in unity, and the other is the kingdom of darkness that's forming their unholy alliance to come against Yahweh's plan and his great house. But let's first look at the gathering of darkness, the forces of evil. To the world, they disguise themselves as ministers of light and peace. They bring peace through force, war, and a whole lot of trickery and deceit. Pope Francis, the world's unholy father, is leading the kings and world leaders to battle just wars. Let's look at the recent UN Resolution 2334. Resolution 2334, and we know that Hebrew Strong's number 23 means the father of light. And 34, spoke about in 1934, speaks about the end of the last generation. Now, on January 15, 2017, UN Resolution 2334, 70 nations gathered together in Paris for a UN meeting to bring true and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. They bring peace by dividing the land for gain. In June 2016, the 10 kings joined with Vatican to promote Christian unity, making war against all those who is not Catholic, just wars. All they want is just wars, because all they seek is war. And on April 22, 2016, 175 countries gathered to sign climate change agenda that will bring about depopulation in the earth. Or are they bringing about a change to climax by reducing about 2 billion people? All they want is just Catholics to remain. All these gatherings are taking place from the forces of darkness as Satan seeks to wipe out all of mankind. In Amos 3:11, we see Satan, the adversary, is surrounding the land, pulling your strength down. Satan is gathering her mighty army against all forms of holiness. She is marching through the land, wiping out all those who will not worship her. And in Daniel 11:31, we see the army stand on her part, and so does the gods. Yahweh shows in her efforts she is preparing slaughter for her own children. Yahweh's decree in Isaiah 14, verse 21. That's found on page 839. Isaiah 14, verse 21. And it says here, prepare slaughter for her children because the iniquities of her fathers, so that they may not rise, possess the earth, and fill the face of the world with cities. Now let's turn our attention to the true fathers of light, Yahweh, to see how he is gathering his last days remnant. The original Resolution 2334 was written since 599 BY, in Jeremiah 23, verses 3 to 4. And that's found on page 591. Jeremiah 23, verses 3 to 4. Okay. And it says here, but I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their folds, homes, and they will be fruitful and increase. And I will set up shepherds over them who will feed them, and they will fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither will they be lacking, says Father Yahweh. Okay. As we look in this troubled world, we see only chaos, turmoil, and confusion created by a beastly system. The great raging and roaring of the sea, nations after nations experiencing great distress, wars and fightings all around. You see refugees camps are growing every new day. Yeshua says, let not your heart be troubled. All this is included in Great Father Yahweh's plan. Okay. In this greatest time of trouble, it is also the greatest time of rejoicing. To those they call refugee, Yahweh calls you his last days remnant. So how can you ever be gathered if you are not first scattered? The beastly system scattered you, but Yahweh will gather you from the ends of the earth. He will bring you to his protected place, his great house in Abelin, Texas. Now we're going to read Isaiah 10, verses 21 through 22. found on page 536. Isaiah 10, verses 21 through 22. And it says here, the remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty Father. But though your people, O Yisrael, be like the sands of the sea, only a remnant of them will return. The consumption's destruction decree will overflow with righteousness. In this hour of calling, the gates of hell will not prevail. Now, Yisrayl Hawkins, the great teacher, the great shepherd of Yahweh, is the one who is calling you home for the family of Yahweh. Now, in 2013, Yisrayl Hawkins said, "Let my people go, for the forces of darkness will not prevail. They will build the walls as high as the Great Wall of China, but Yahweh your Father will drive it into the ground, just like he did for the wall of Jericho. When they close their doors and their borders upon you, Yahweh said, I have set an open door before you, which no man can shut. He will dry up rivers for you. He will make a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters. Behold, Yahweh will do a new thing. Now it will spring forth. Will you not know it? He will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to give drink to the people, his chosen ones." Now let's read Isaiah 49, 9 through 10, verse 12, and verse 22. That's found on page 561. Okay. Now it says here, "So you may say to the prisoners, 'Come out,' and to those in darkness, 'Show yourself.' They will feed in the ways, and their pastures will be in all high places. They will not hunger nor thirst, neither will the heat nor the sun strike them, for he who has mercy on them will lead them, even by the springs of waters he will guide them." Verse 12, "See them, they will come from afar, from the direction of the west, and from the countries from which the exiles will be brought back." And now to verse 22, it says, "This is what Yahweh the Father says, Behold, I will lift up my hand to the Gentiles and set up my standards to the people. They will bring your sons in their arms, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders." Now, great house Yahweh, are you rejoicing? Yes, praise Yahweh. In the greatest time of trouble comes the greatest time of rejoicing. Do you know why? Because we are doing the greatest work on this earth. We are taking 2 billion people right out of the Leviathan's mouth. And guess what? There is nothing that Satan and her demons can do about it. Can you see the nations coming? Can you hear them? The footsteps of the remnant? As we look to Yahweh's television, we can see and hear the footsteps are getting closer and closer. Rejoice, house Yahweh, but are you ready to meet them? Are you ready to meet them? Yes, you have to get ready. Great house Yahweh, this is the hour when all nations will declare this. And let's turn over my last scripture, Jeremiah 23, 7 through 8. Jeremiah 23, verses 7 through 8. Okay, you can read this along with me. And it says, "Therefore the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, As surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but they will say, As surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Yahweh out of the protected place and from all nations where I have driven them, and they will dwell in their own land. Rejoice, lift up your heads, because your redemption is now at the very door." And with this, I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Have you ever planted a garden or planted seeds, and then you watered them a little, and then you see that they start to sprout, and there might be 2 leaves at first, and then you water them some more, and you put them out in the sun, and they grow some more, and then you weed all around it to get all the weeds out, and then maybe after a while you come back and you put some mulch down and maybe some of your compost around your plants. And then you get excited when you see these little flowers and these little buds that start to come, right? Because then you know then you're going to get your fruit or your vegetables. And then you watch them as they grow, and they start off really small, and then they get bigger. And then gathering day comes, and you get so excited, and you take your basket, and you go outside, and you pick some zucchini, and you put in your basket. You might find some squash, you might have some heads of lettuce. But then when you get to your tomato plant, there's these little cherry tomatoes, and they're hiding behind the leaves, right? And you have to move it around and search for them. But then you notice that your basket is full, and you have all different kinds of vegetables. And once you've gathered all your vegetables in your basket, you take them inside to kosher them and make them ready. Now, the gardener sees the fruits of their labor. They see that they planted these seeds long ago, and they watered them, and they weeded them, and now it was time to harvest them. Now, let's compare this to the gathering that is taking place now. Yahweh planted seeds in each one of us, long time ago. Maybe our parents, and we came here with our parents. But those seeds that were planted were seeds that Yahweh planted because he knew that there would be a time of gathering, a great gathering that would take place. Yahweh gathers people from all over the world, some people from afar and some people from nearby. Now, we know that the gathering taking place now in these last days will be greater than the gathering in Moshe's time. And in Jeremiah 23, verse 7 to 8, it says, "Behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel onto the protected place at Abel, and from all the countries where they had been driven, and they will dwell in their own land." Now think about the gathering that took place in Moshe's time. We know that was 3 million people. But how many people is Yahweh gathering now? He's gathering 2 billion. And we may only tend to think about the gathering that took place with Moshe, but we know that there must have been some willing servants that helped Moshe. Can you think of any? One in particular was Yeshua ben Nun. Now let's talk about him a little bit. He was trained in righteousness as a child. He was a willing servant. He worked under Moshe. Moshe taught him how to lead the people. Now, there are many times that people rose up against Moshe, like the time when Korah and his group did, but Yeshua ben Nun proved that he was a loyal, faithful servant. And because of this, his reward was great. He was able to go into the land that was promised to the children of Israel. Now, let's compare this gathering to the gathering that is taking place now. Our Moshe in this time period is Yisrayl Hawkins. He is gathering us and getting us ready and teaching us Yahweh's laws for this great gathering that would take place. And there are many willing servants who help do the work. Over the past couple of weeks, after I heard Pastor's sermon, specifically last week, and he spoke about becoming a servant towards one another and having that attitude of a servant, I found this past week I kept asking myself, am I a willing servant? What else can I do to become a willing servant? Well, the definition of willing means ready and eager to help. So here's some things a willing servant are. A willing servant is joyful. A willing servant may go to work early and stay late to complete the job. A willing servant may take work home to do. A willing servant has a pleasant attitude. A willing servant always asks, what else can I do to serve? As I was thinking about willing servants, I thought about young children. And a young child is a very willing servant, but there's some point where we get, before we hit our teen years, that we get to the point where we don't like serving, or we might have an attitude. And it is very great to start training a child as a young age to be a servant. And we see that willing and that zeal in them. But when they get to those years and they don't want to help, you have to encourage them and show them the rewards that come from being a willing servant. I'm very blessed over the past couple of years to help at the school with the children. But within the past 2 months, I was asked to help with an older age group, which I had never helped with before. I normally always work with the little children. And the first day I was there, it came around time for cleanup at the end of the day. And I was expecting it to go very well. We had some attitudes. I don't want to do that job. Why does she get to do the job I like? Look at what so-and-so's doing. She shouldn't be doing that. And no one did their job. And we left the day and the jobs didn't get done. And as a teacher, I thought to myself, I said, well, this cannot continue. We need to talk about becoming a willing servant. Because we can serve each other, but with a bad attitude, is that what we're showing Yahweh? Or with a, why does she get to do that and not me? And so the next day, we had a nice discussion about becoming a willing servant and the rewards that we get from serving each other willingly. And so as time went on, we practiced serving each other willingly. And the younger children, they always are so excited to help that when cleanup time came, they always come around and they want to help the older girls. And they say, what can I do to help you? Can I sweep the floor? They're always very willing. Well, I noticed that the girls had a chart on the wall, and it said their name and then who did what job for what day. Now, the younger children noticed that the older girls had a chart. Well, let me ask you a question. What do you think the younger children did? They went and they made themselves a chart. They were so willing to help. And so I asked them the other day, I said, can I have your chart? And they said, you can't have our chart, but we'll make you one. And so they all sat down, the little 6-year-olds, and they made a chart. And they had their cleanup chart, and they put all of their jobs on here. And now the one they have has their names by each job. But this was this willing attitude that little children have, younger children have. They always are willing to help. They are so excited to just have a job or just be a part of the work that it doesn't matter what job you give them, they're always willing. They don't look to see what the other person's doing. What job does she have? I want her job. They are so glad that they have the opportunity to serve. This is the character that Yahweh looks for in us. He looks for us to be willing to serve each other. We can see examples throughout the scriptures. Yeshua ben Nun was just one of many examples of a willing servant. Yahweh is giving us an opportunity to become a willing servant and do our part in this great gathering. Will you say yes? In Luke chapter 12, verse 40 and 43, it says, therefore, be ready also, for the Son of Man comes at an hour that you do not expect. Blessed is that servant whom his ruler, when he comes, finds him so doing. So in closing, let us continue to do our job diligently at willingly serve each other and help and do our part in this great gathering. And I would like to thank the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins, for teaching us all Yahweh's laws and giving me the opportunity to speak today. And now I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. The title of my speech is 9 to 1. There are many prophecies that have been fulfilled in these last days, but today I'm going to focus on 9 of those prophecies that led up to this one gathering. This work truly began August 28, 1934, with the birth of Yisrayl Hawkins. That is spoken of in Isaiah 44, verses 1 through 2, and Isaiah chapter 49, verse 1. Also, what started in 1934 was the knowledge that was increased, which is also talked about in Daniel 12, verse 4. We have heard many stories on how Yahweh was guiding Pastor and preparing him to be the one sent in these last days. As is spoken of in Isaiah 49, verse 2, Yahweh hid him and he made him a polished shaft. And remember that polished shaft means trained. In 1962, the two witnesses began their work together. They hosted a radio show, Yaakov asked the questions, and Yisrael answered them. Their reaching out by a teeny radio station was them taking their first steps and starting the work of Yahweh and teaching his laws. And this is spoken of in Isaiah chapter 48, verses 13, where it says that they will minister together. In 1982, the two witnesses dedicated the house of Yahweh. And that is talked about in Zechariah chapter 5, verses 10 through 11. So if you can turn there with me. That's found on page 719. And it says, Then I said to the Malach who was speaking to me, Where are they, the two witnesses, going with the ephah? And they said to me, To build the house of Yahweh, according to the standard of perfection by Yahweh's laws in a Babylonian land which does not yet exist. And it will be established at that time when the two witnesses are called out to their work as the established place, the habitation of Yahweh, the house of Yahweh. In February 4th, 1983, the house of Yahweh was established. And you can see this prophecy is talked about in Isaiah 2, verse 2, and Micaiah 4, verse 1. In 1987, the house of Yahweh printed the first Book of Yahweh. Isaiah 34, verse 16 tells us to search out the Book of Yahweh and read. In Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, it's on page 713. It says, Yes, and at this time I will return to the people the pure word, the laws and the prophets, so that all of them may call on the name of Yahweh and serve him with one accord in unity. Another prophecy that has been fulfilled is the measuring of the Temple Mount, which is spoken of in Revelation chapter 1:11 and Yekexia 40, verse 3. In September 13, 1993, the peace treaty was signed. And October 13, 1993, it went into effect. And this is spoken of in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. August 10, 1995, the website www.yahweh.com went live. And this prophecy is fulfilled in Matthew 24, verse 14, and Yakana Mark 13, verse 10. If you can turn there with me, that is found on page 775. And it says, but the message must first be published throughout all the nations. In 2008, the persecution came hard. In Isaiah 43, verse 28, it said that Yisrael would be given to reproaches. In 2 Timothy 3, verse 12 says, all who do righteously will suffer persecution. All of this and more has taken place in order for this gathering to occur. Throughout all these years, the one sent has been exposing the sins in these last days, the world in these last days, and telling them, just as Revelation 18 verse 4 says, come out from among them and be you separate, says Yahweh. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Now come out from the world. Coming out from among them and separating ourselves is coming out from the world. Touching not the unclean thing is having nothing to do with the ways of this world. And Yahweh will receive you. There are two ways to come out of this world. One is physically, moving to Yahweh's house, and the second one is mentally. Now, we talk about this a lot, the mentally coming out of this world, but mentally coming out of this world is easier said than done. So let's go over some ways that we can mentally put our focus on Yahweh. The number one is getting involved in Yahweh's work. That's one of the blessings. When you're getting involved in Yahweh's work, that's all you think about is the work of Yahweh. The second one is studying to show yourself approved. And a couple weeks ago in Pastor's sermon, he says, don't just read over the scriptures, but study every single word, because every word you study, you understand it puts another piece to the puzzle. And another thing to remember is no matter what we go through, we look at the big picture, which is Yahweh's plan. We look that we are that one person among the many who have been called to Yahweh's house, and we are going to be able to teach the 2 billion. And one last thing to remember is that we know that as we strive our best to get all sin out of our lives, we are making our place in Yahweh's house sure. And we are going to be able to teach the 2 billion. So I encourage you to find your place in the work and stay strong, because when we stay in Yahweh's house, the 2 billion we will be able to teach. And with this, I'll turn over to the next teacher.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. My title is We Are the Fruits in Yahweh's Garden. And, as you know, our theme today is the gathering. And a couple of feasts back, we had the harvest theme. We talked about how Yahweh is harvesting those that he wants to use. And so, as I was preparing my speech, I was thinking, what are some things that we gather? We gather fruits, vegetables, flowers. There's a long list of things that you gather. But there's a process that goes through for each thing. And Yahweh is gathering people, but there are a few steps that are in common. And the first one is that a seed must be planted. And like the speaker before me said, Yahweh planted a seed within each and every one of us to learn and want to learn more of his ways. And, whether you're here in the house of Yahweh, physically, or whether no matter where you are in the world, he's planted a seed so when he's ready, he can call you. And Pastor referred to it as a light switch. And when he's ready, your mind is going to be open and the understanding will come. And you wanted to know more, and that leads us to step number 2. So that seed, it continues to grow. Now, as you know, with any plant, there has to be the right conditions. And Pastor is a perfect example of that, because before Yahweh called him here to Abelin, he was in Oklahoma. And there were things necessary to ensure that he was guarded and protected and kept. The Dust Bowl was a perfect example of how it drove all the people who did not uphold Yahweh's laws and didn't strive their best to keep Yahweh's laws out of that area, so he was able to be trained and guided. And from him, we are being trained and guided. So the garden of Yahweh, as we know, is the house of Yahweh. And us, the seeds, we're being planted and we're being watered with the water of life. And we're continuing to grow according to the teachings that Pastor is giving to us. The water that's coming forth, Yeshua Messiah said that we'll never thirst again, because it satisfies us and it gives us everything that we need to continue to grow in Yahweh. The third step is when they're fully grown and you see them, they're grown and they're ready to be picked. Now, nowadays, in, for example, wheat, they have these big machines, and they just go through and they grab all of them and they dump them into their storage fields. But in gardening, sometimes that's not always the way. You either have to go to each plant, you have to pick your tomatoes, you have to pick your vegetables off your plants. Someone had to take the time to choose and to select which one they wanted to use. You can't use a rotten tomato, you can't use the rotten fruit. You have to select which one you know can be used for what you want it for. And that's exactly what Yahweh did with each and every one of us. He selected us, as Ephesians 1:4 says, before the foundation of the world, He chose each and every one of us. Why? Because He knew that He could use us. Then we come to the step that we are in now. We are being prepared. And this is one of the most important steps, is because Yahweh placed us exactly where He needed us for us to continue to grow. For example, when you place flowers, when you arrange flowers, you don't set all the colors together, you mix them up and you change them for their ultimate beauty. And that's what Yahweh is doing with us. He's brought us to the places where He needs us, which is His house, and He's continuing to work with us, to cultivate us, so we can bring forth that righteous fruit. And in Luke 8:15, it says, "But the seed that fell on the rich ground are those who, having heard the word, the law, and the prophets, with an honest and righteous heart keep it and bring forth fruit with patience through persistence." So we are those people, we are the ones who fell on the rich ground, which is the house of Yahweh, and we are taking the laws and taking the prophecies, and we're putting them within ourselves. Like one of the speakers said, being willing to serve, being diligent to study. All these things are bringing forth that seed that Yahweh has planted within us. But we're not done yet, because the next step is we want to be presented before Yahweh. And are you ready? And in your mind, I think, when you first hear that question, it comes to mind all the things that you have to do. Well, I have to overcome this, I have to overcome that. But one comforting thing that Pastor always refers us to is that it's our effort that counts. Because no matter where you are, whether you're watching through the television, if you can't be here physically, Yahweh, remember, He selected each and every one of us, and He hasn't forgot about any of us. He's waiting, and He's helping, and He's guiding each and every one of us and bringing us to the standard of perfection that we need to be in. Now, there's still a difference between the plants and us, because once you've got your plants, once you've picked them off the vine, they only last for so long. Once your flowers are in that, bouquet, they only last for so long. But the difference with us is Yahweh gives us the opportunity to continue to grow, to continue to improve. So no matter, whether He's chosen us, we still have the opportunity to learn from the greatest teacher in the world and continue to grow in His righteousness. Now, this process didn't just occur once. There's so many of us here, we all came at different times. This is a continual process that Yahweh is doing. He's continuing to plant seeds. He's continuing to bring more people to His house. And He's continuing to fulfill the prophecy that we heard about in Jeremiah 23, 7 through 8, bringing all these 2 billion people to His house, the garden of Yahweh. If you can turn over to 1 Kepha 2:9. 1 Kepha 2:9. It says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation." And if you look at side note D, it says, "A gathering, those called out, a peculiar people, that you would show forth the praises of Him who has called you out of darkness into this marvelous light." So we are this chosen generation. We are the gathering that Yahweh has brought forth out of the darkness in the world and has shown us the light of His laws. And with that, I turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. I wanted to talk about the way Yahweh's plan works, because the gathering we're being gathered together, but sisters, 2 billion people. And you look around, who's going to be instructing and teaching, and who's going to be in charge of it, the captains of the groups that are going to take care of these 2 billion people. It's not like they're just going to come and there's going to be instant everything. No, it's a job. It's a big job. And Yahweh's plan was from the beginning, right? Yachanan 1:1. In the beginning was the plan, and we were in that plan. Like a pastor talks about the sea of glass, and that they can see us out there, Yeshua and Yahweh, they can see us stand. Like I can see this group of people here, but I can also see each one individually. I see you, I know you, I know you. And that's how Yahweh is. And they look out and they see the group, but they see us individually. And they work one-on-one in our lives. They have a plan for each one of us. Every day, everything that occurs to you, they know it's going to occur. They know what you're going to do, how you're going to react. So I wanted to talk about how when we're being tested, Pastor tells us, count it all blessings. Jacob 1:2, my sisters, count it all joy when you're being tested. But how can I be joyful when my heart's breaking or somebody's crushing my foot? Or you see what I'm saying? And I finally think I came upon how I can look at this. Because Pastor said the tests are going to get intense, and they have to, because we have to be ready to take care of 2 billion people. We can't get upset because you stepped on my toe. We can't blame each other for our hurt feelings or anything. We have to be able to set that example. So when we're being tested, I started doing this. I started, instead of looking at each other, well, if she hadn't have said that or done that, I started looking at me and asking Yahweh, please, Yahweh, show me what you're showing me. Let me see it. Let me see what you want me to overcome, because everything that we go through is for us to overcome so we can help that 2 billion people that are coming in. And each one of them, it's not like there's just going to be this massive they're going to be individuals with feelings, with tests and trials, and we have to be able to say, this is how you do it. And I wanted to show, because there's nothing in our lives that Yahweh's not in control of. He protects us. Can you imagine what he went through to get you here? The right time, the right second that you would listen to be called. I mean, it's a tremendous thing, but he's just so awesome. Okay, and to protect you every day. I bet there's not one person out here that can't look and say, at the end of a test or a trial or something that occurred to you, that Yahweh wasn't protecting me. And I'll tell you, a couple months ago, I had this big mess in my kitchen floor when I got up. And I was like, I don't know what occurred. And so I started looking. I went down the little hall there to the back room, and I heard something rushing around. It's a rat in my house. But then I'm looking around, I said, no, rats are sneaky. They don't make big messes and tear things apart. So it ended up, it was a squirrel. Well, I went to work and they came to get the squirrel out, and it was 2 squirrels. I don't know how they got in. So when Pastor called me and he said, well, they got the squirrels. You might go home and check things, because they said they cleaned everything up. Well, the feeling you would get, what they have to clean up. So I went home and everything looked fine. And I couldn't see anything, it occurred, I opened my little broom closet that I never go in, and there was a rat, a big rat. So I called Pastor, and he said, what are you doing, raising a zoo there? No. So anyway, he sent them people, and they took care of the rat. Well, when I got back home, I noticed 2 little holes in my linoleum by the sink. And every time I would walk across it, this stuff would ooze up. And all I could think was, well, what did they do with what is that? And this went on for a couple of days. So finally, I said, I got to see what's under there. I had sprayed it with everything. It was still coming up. I pulled the linoleum back, and the floor was sopping wet. I mean, the linoleum was sealed really well. It was sopping wet. And in front of the sink and the stove, the floor was rotted. And it was rotted in other places, but it was really rotted in the places that I stand the most. And so eventually it turned out there was slow leaks, and this had been going on for who knows how long. And they fixed it, and they fixed the floor. But after it was over, I knew that right away Yahweh was teaching me patience, because I don't have a lot of that. Well, I'm getting better. But also I thought, Yahweh, you protected me. Look at the lengths you had to go to protect me, because I'd have never pulled that linoleum up. So everything that occurs in your life, you have to know that, look for that great part, because it's always there. We always focus on, and this was a long ordeal, so I could focus on, man, what's taking so long? I can't stand this mess. You know, I had to really struggle with it. But in the end, I felt so foolish of any thoughts I might have had, because he was protecting me. And sisters, it says in 1 Corinthians 10:13, there is no temptation taken hold of you except what is common to man, and Yahweh is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. He won't let us be tested beyond what we can bear. And he will make sure that we're taken care of. He will take care of us. And he says, and when you're tempted, he'll give you a way of escape. Now, we've got the gathering. We're already gathered, but there's 2 billion people gathering together, and we have a few in the kitchen that from Africa and places, and I marvel at when they come into the kitchen. They come in with a willing heart. You can't believe it. They are so thankful to be here. They worked so hard to get here. And it's like the judge said. She said they're calling and they're saying, how can I get there? Please tell me what to do. How can I get there? Sisters, when they get here, who's going to be talking to them? Even before they get here now, when the calls come in, what are you going to say? We have to start thinking about what our real job is. This is just, yes, Yahweh brought us here to learn and everything, but now we're down to the nitty-gritty. We have really got to come together. We've got to start focusing on being the part of Yahweh's plan that he wants us to be. And he knows, right? Doesn't he know who's staying and who's going? And there's nothing we can do about that. We have to worry about me. I have to worry about me. You have to worry about you. In Exodus 15:2, Yahweh says, Yahweh is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He's my heavenly Father. Pastor has taught us over and over again. He's about the gathering, he'll look out here at us and he'll say, you're 99.9% perfect. But sisters, we've really got to get there. We have got to get there. This is the time. Doesn't it just boggle your mind, 2 billion people? I can't imagine it. But one thing we have to do, we have to let Yahweh work in our life. We have to allow him, because being women, sometimes we have that, oh, they're not going to do this, I'll take care of it myself. But we can't do that anymore. We have to wait on Yahweh, let Yahweh do it, not try to do his job or pastor's job. We cannot do pastor's job. I don't want to do pastor's job. I don't know how he does it. But one thing we can be sure of, he will take care of our needs. It may not be what we want, but he will take care of our needs. And that's how we have to see the people coming. We have to be able to take care of their needs. And their needs are not only going to be physical, they're going to be emotional. So I want us all to be able to look out here to the people that are watching out there and say, we're ready. You come on, you're ready. We'll take care of you. And don't worry about anything. Just get here. And that's what it's all about, sisters. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Okay. I'm going to be continuing on this great program of the Great Gathering. And I want to focus your attention on the May 2016 newsletter. It's called A Gathering That Tops That of Moses. And in it, Pastor asks a question, and he says, how does the Vatican, which means divining serpent, fight against Yeshua the Lamb? And he goes on with Genesis 3, 1 through 5, and 7 and 13. In Genesis 1, it says, now the serpent was more subtle and crafty than any beast of the field which Yahweh had made. And in 4, it says, and the serpent said to the woman, you will surely not die. For he knows in the day you eat of it, which is the tree of righteousness and evil, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, knowing righteousness and evil. The subject of my speech this morning is on Satan entices through deception. And what I want to do is I want to give you a quick rundown. Please write down these dates. I don't have time to really go into what these dates mean, but I want to show you a comparison of Satan's work and Yahweh's work. In 1929, the Lateran Treaty was signed, which gave the Vatican its power back. The Vatican needed to have its power back in order to do what it wanted to do in the following years. In 1933, it signed a concordat with Adolf Hitler, which this gave Adolf Hitler the idea that the Vatican and the Catholic Church were behind him in his power struggle at that time period. In 1933 and 1934, the Catholic Church said that movie pictures have become so evil and so unrighteous, according to their standards, that they needed to come up with a code of ethics. And they created the Catholic Legion of Decency. And every single movie from 1936 until 1956 was given a rating by the Catholic Church. This was not an order, this was not a law, but everybody followed the code of ethics that was established by the Catholic Church. That list of movies is 293 pages long. So you would have to go through and see what the codings was. A1 was it was family oriented, it was okay to watch, and then it goes on to the different settings. In 1937, Disney came out with its very first full feature animation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was so successful that they came out with 4 more these were blockbusters, animations. One was Bambi, one was Fantasia, Cinderella, and it went on and on and on. Disney eventually made 50 top-selling animated movies, all targeting children between the ages of 3 to 7. Now you're wondering, okay, what does this have to do with the Great Gathering in these last days? The Catholic Church has taken over the entertainment business. In the 1950s, it changed from being the Catholic Legion of Decency to the National Legion of Decency, and then it finally fizzled out because the main Catholic very devout Catholic person who was part of the producers in Hollywood died, so it went over to the bishops, and it was the bishops who took care of the decency code. In 1967, Bonnie and Clyde was released, and this was the year that they said created the new Hollywood, which means that all things were allowed to be revealed in the movies. And to go back, in 1934, we know that Pastor was born. In the late 1950s, he went to college. In 1967, he moved to Abelin. And this set the stage for the establishment of the House of Yahweh and Yahweh's work in these last days, and which led up to where we are today, which is the Great Gathering. Okay? Now, one of the things that Disney actually really focused on, again, was the animated features. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, there's Mulan, there's The Princess and the Frog. All of these movies got an A1 rating from the Catholic Church because they were animated movies, they were family friendly, everybody did good, the evil person didn't win, the good person won, the woman was a great princess, she was this, she was that, the prince was supposedly a great person, and all these great standards that were going on. And to continue on with this is what some of the articles that we brought out. Some of the Disney princesses, as they are called, are compared to the saints in the Catholic Church. Snow White is compared to Saint Maria Goretti, and she was, because she chased down the evil queen, and she was trying to kill her, and Saint Maria was martyred for her purity. That's how they compared Snow White. Cinderella has God's grace. She was compared to Saint Christina the Astonishing. And it says that St. Christina appeared to have died, which Cinderella appeared to have died. She was kissed and brought back. Again, this is all deception, fairy tales, magic, fairy godmothers. This is not of Yahweh. This is how Satan entices the children. This is all aimed at the children, 3 to 7 years old, because around 7, 8, they stop believing in Santa Claus, they stop believing in the fairy godmother, they stop believing in happily ever after, and they start, according to the world's standards, they start to grow up and start to become young men and women as they go into their teen years. Okay, so the Catholic Church had to have been able to grab hold of these children in this time period. Now, the other thing that's going on with this is the enticement. It wasn't only the enticement of the children. The enticement came with the money. And if you could bring my poster over, I would greatly appreciate that. Disney Consumer Products, in 2001, this is the enticement of the parents, and this is the enticement of the businesses in this last days. In 2001, it was a $300 million business. In 2006, it was a $3 billion business. In 2016, it was a $14.15 billion business going on with Disney products. And in 2016, Planned Parenthood got together with Walt Disney and came up with a program to entice the children that is okay for fornication, adultery, bestiality, and sodomy. And if you could, is my poster? If you could show the poster, I will show you what they are doing. Cinderella gets tested for STDs in new sex ed awareness art. And everybody is so amazed about this program. But sex education is for children ages, sixth grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. Walt Disney is geared towards children in the ages of 3 to 7 years old. They are setting up your children to participate in fornication, adultery, sodomy, bestiality. To take it one step farther, Disney is reintroducing Beauty and the Beast. When Beauty and the Beast came out, it got an A1 rating from the Vatican. Beauty and the Beast is nothing more than bestiality. This year, Beauty and the Beast, it gets its gay moment. Walt Disney is actually going to allow Beauty and the Beast, one of the characters, to present their gay moment of bringing forth homosexuality. Okay? People, this is your children. Guard and keep, as Yahweh says. Guard and keep your children. Remember Proverbs 22:6, where it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Guard your children with the House of Yahweh literature. If you're not sure of where to go on the internet, go to YisraelSays.com and bring up your questions there. Go to askisrael.com and you will be able to get access to everything that the house of Yahweh has produced. And what we want to do is, I want to take you to Revelations, let me find it right here, 18:4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not partake in her sins, and so that you do not receive of her plagues." And again, what we're doing is we are following a great gathering, and it's Jeremiah 23:3-4. "But I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where they have been driven, and bring them back to their folds, homes, and they will be fruitful and will increase. And I will set up my shepherds over them who will feed them, and they will fear no more, nor be dismayed. Neither will they be lacking, says Yahweh. Behold, the day comes, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch, and the king will reign and succeed, and will execute judgment and justice in the earth." Parents, please guard and keep your children. Train them in the house of Yahweh. Any questions, call Abelin, and they will be able to give you the advice you need. And with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The title of my speech today is Israel Walks in the Light of the Sun. The subheading for Psalm 80 says, "Cause your face to shine upon us." And in verse 15 it says, "And sustain what your right hand has planted, and the branch, the sun, you strengthened for yourself." How did Yahweh strengthen the overseer, the branch, for himself? Malachi 4 verse 5 tells us that the laws and the prophecies are the strength of Yahweh, and that's how Yisrayl Hawkins is strengthened. He is a man of strength. I know no other that is as strong in Yahweh as him. So why did he do this? For what purpose? Let's turn over to Isaiah chapter 60, verse 21. "All of your people will be righteous. They will inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified." It is so that Yahweh can be glorified through Yisrayl Hawkins in bringing his people to righteousness, bringing us to righteousness, bringing all those yet to come to righteousness. And also we've learned that that word glorified means to be made clear, to be made crystal clear. And it is Yisrayl Hawkins that makes the way of Yahweh crystal clear to us. Let me tell you a story about something that occurred to me last week. I'm at the office and I'm doing my work and minding my own business. And as my great supervisor always tells me, when you're done, make sure you sign and date everything. So I do. I sign and date. And so I signed and dated. And then I looked at the date. And it was 2/28/17. And I looked at it again. And all day long, I could not get my mind off of that date. You notice that 2 of those numbers are the lot number of the overseer, 28 and 17. So I could not wait till the day was over so I could go look up this number and, look more into it, which I did. So in the gematria, well, first what I did is I wrote 2 plus 28 plus 17 equals 47. And if you turn 47 backwards, you get 74. So right there you have all 3 of the overseer's lot numbers. So when I went to do the gematria of it, I took the words February 28th, 2017. And the gematria came up 4989. And in Hebrew that means sweetness, to be sweet. Now remember, these are numbers about our overseer. To be sweet and to be sweet, sweetness. Now, I haven't always thought of Yisrayl Hawkins that way, and if I could have my clip, maybe that will help you to understand.
What excuse will you have when you stand before the throne in the day of decision when Yahweh will pronounce on you, get away from me, I don't even know you? You don't know how, brother. I cried overnight for some of you because you won't pay attention and because you fail to remember what I show you. This is not a game we're playing here at the house of Yahweh. This is Yahweh's last day's work, and there is no other.
If you've gone and go over the Going On to Perfection series, you'll know that you can read those words. But when the overseer gets up and you hear those words on the CD, it's a little scary. And I was a little scared of him back then because I just came to the house of Yahweh like 30 years ago, and I had 2 small babies, and his delivery was like a little scary to me. In fact, when the Wisconsin group would be invited over to his place for a dinner during the feast, I would always sit way far away because I thought, surely if my children act up or he sees the shortcoming that I know I have shortcomings in with me, that sword is going to come out and that fire is going to proceed from his mouth. You know, all that in Revelation that you don't really understand. And I'm like, so I was fine sitting way far back. But he has changed in his delivery in these last days. And to go on to the Greek for the gematria, it means a safe father. A nourisher, a protector, an upholder, one who is advanced in the knowledge of Yeshua, one who is the originator of a family, a preacher, a teacher, standing in a father's place, caring for his spiritual children, to save, deliver, protect, save, make whole, salvation of the future deliverance of believers at the second coming of Yeshua. Now, I had gotten this information on that day, on 2/28/17. Well, that night it was the next night I had gone up to the cafeteria, and I heard this rumor that Yisrayl Hawkins was going to give bread, honey, and butter to everyone, free of charge. And I thought, wow, that is like just what I read in that gematria of that date, that's the kind of person that he is. And I called someone and I said, you know, there's a rumor going around that Yisrayl Hawkins is giving the stuff to everyone free of charge. And the person said, has Yisrayl Hawkins gone crazy? And I wanted to set him straight. I said, of course, Yisrayl Hawkins is crazy. Yisrayl Hawkins is crazy about Yahweh, Yeshua, and the plan of Yahweh. And we're crazy about Yisrayl Hawkins, too. So I went on in number 47 of that, where that total 47, it means strong, mighty, stout-hearted, mighty, only of Yahweh, and to soar. And in Greek it means cleanliness, purity, clean, innocent, modest, perfect, pure from every fault, immaculate, clear, crystal clear, holy as being free from an admixture of evil, pure as being tested, judged by the sunlight, sacred, blameless, holiness, set apart and devoted to Yahweh. And we know that the overseer is devoted to Yahweh. He's devoted to us in bringing us to what we need to be so he can set us as an offering to Father Yahweh, pure and clean also. And it also means to foster, to cherish with tender love and tender care. And this is where I saw a prophecy fulfilled. In Matthew 24:32. Now remember the video, and remember what all these things mean about tenderness, caring, concern for a family. In Matthew 24:32 it says, now learn a parable from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender, you see how the overseer has become tender, how he has it. Not that his words back then were any different than the words are now. The delivery's a little different, I think. But the words were always what we stuck to. The words of life that he taught us, the understanding of the scriptures, the hope that we had that lies within us, that he built within us. When you see that the branch has become tender and puts out his leaves, know that summer is near. And then in the next verse, know that his coming is in the end of the age, and it's truly at the very door. So I looked up number 74 also to remind myself what number 74 meant. And it means the Father of light. Yisrayl Hawkins stands in the light of the sun. Now, what this means is it doesn't mean he's going to go outside and stand in that sun and all of this knowledge and understanding and greatness is coming to him. He does stand up for the health benefits of the sun. But Yisrayl Hawkins stands in the light of the Son of Yahweh, which is Yeshua. He stands in that light. He has always glorified and looked to Yeshua and built him up and showed how much we also need to honor our high priest. He also, last week, and it was such an amazing thing to me, how Yisrayl Hawkins imitates Yeshua. He is like a living testimony of Yeshua at this time. He showed us how everything that Yeshua did, he wants to do it just like that, like the no low contender law. He wants to feed the people. He's preparing for the gathering to bring these people in. So we see that he has done everything that Yeshua is doing. He's doing everything that Yeshua has done. And that is a great testimony on his behalf. Now, in 1 Kings chapter 10, it's the account of the Queen of Sheba when she heard about Solomon. And we liken this to everyone in the world that is hearing about Yisrayl Hawkins, that when she came and she said, I didn't even hear half of what was you were about, but when I got here I saw everything. And in verse 8 it says, how joyous are your men and how joyous are your officials who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Now let's put Yisrayl Hawkins here. Blessed be Yahweh your Father who delights in you, Yisrayl Hawkins, setting you on his throne, O Yisrayl Hawkins, because Yahweh loves you, Yisrayl Hawkins, forever. He made you the teacher in order to do justice and righteousness. Do you believe that? We must all believe that. And in Luke 20, verse 21, this was spoken to Yeshua, and may we forever speak these words to Yisrayl Hawkins, the branch, he who walks in the light of the sun. It says, teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you show no respect of persons to anyone, but teach the way of Yahweh truly. May Yahweh always continue to help us to support the one whom Yahweh is glorified. And at this time, let us all stand and rejoice as our next speaker comes forward as she always walks in the light also.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. I want you to remember the first time you ever entered into the house of Yahweh. I remember mine. It was in July of 2004. I drove down from Oklahoma for a Sabbath. As soon as I entered into the sanctuary, it was an immediate, overwhelming joy. It felt so right, and it felt like it was home. That Sabbath, Kanya Didia and Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins spoke. As soon as services was over, I went immediately and asked if I could come back for feast. I drove back to Oklahoma. I came back for the Feast of Tabernacles, and it was amazing. We did Daughters of Sarah in workshops that feast all feast long, and the amount of knowledge that was brought out that feast and the amount of righteousness that I gained that feast was extremely great. I went back and forth from feast to feast, and I remember calling my counselors at one point and saying, I want to move to Abel. I want to move to Abel. I am missing out on so much not being there. And in 2008, I moved to Abel. Not in any way at all how I had ever planned to move to Abel, but I did move to Abel. And I always had to remind myself of the plan of Yahweh, and I had to remind myself of Ecclesiastes 3:1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And I also have to remind myself all the time, because I plan out so many things, just like moving to Abel, and it wasn't in any way how I'd expected, but it was great. But in Proverbs 6:9, a man's mind plans his way, but Yahweh directs his steps. I loved being in Abel, and I still love being at Abel. When I moved here, I was asked to get a job out in the world. They said that they hated to do that, but at this time I needed to get a job out in the world. I really didn't want to. But I did just as I was asked, because this is Yahweh's plan, and He is directing our paths. So for 8 years, I would ask every so often, can I go and work for the house of Yahweh? Can I quit my job? Can I go work for the house of Yahweh? For 8 years, I asked this. 2 months ago, I asked again. Guess what my answer was? Okay. I cried the first day of work, the second day of work, because it was joy. I have had to use so much self-control just because of the joy that I have working in the work of Yahweh. I have to say, as we're working in the work of Yahweh, there's a really great scripture to keep in mind. In Philippians 3:12, not as though I have already attained, nor were already perfect, but I keep on pursuing after it, that I may take hold of that which Yeshua Messiah has also taken hold of me. Brothers, I do not consider myself as having yet taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press on toward the mark of the prize of the high calling in Yahweh and Yeshua Messiah. Therefore, let us, as many as are perfect, think in this way. And if in anything you think otherwise, Yahweh will indeed reveal it to you. Nevertheless, to that which we have already attained, let us walk according to that standard. Let us be of that same great mind. This is a great scripture to read and to keep in our minds, because we know as we're working alongside one another, not one of us is perfect, but we are all pursuing after it. Every person that is sitting here today is pursuing after it, or they wouldn't be here. I have to say that anyone who's a part of the work of Yahweh, you have to know that that is a mighty, mighty great blessing from Yahweh. It is a true blessing, because out in the world, it's ugly out there. It is very, very ugly. Anyone who even thinks or allows a thought to come to their mind where they think, maybe I could go out and get a job out in the world. Maybe it's greener on the other side. The only thing green out there is money. And that's all going to be destroyed very, very soon. The work of Yahweh is a place that you work alongside righteous people pursuing after righteousness. Out in the world, you know what I worked alongside? I did have 2 sisters, don't get me wrong. I had 2 righteous sisters that I had, and I praise Yahweh for them every day that I was out there. But what I mostly worked alongside was Satan's tools. They don't know that they're Satan's tools. They're deceived. They're subtle and crafty, just as they have been trained to be. And what they want to do is they want to alter your mind, get you off the straight and narrow path that we should be on, and get you to thinking, maybe I should leave the house of Yahweh. Maybe I can do this and still come to the house of Yahweh. And eventually, you're going to go off. There is a really great gathering coming, and I want you to think, why were you gathered when you were gathered? Why did you come here, and why did Yahweh gather you here when he did? Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins has told us 1,000 times why we were gathered here when we were. We have to become teachers. We have to learn what to teach so we can teach what we've learned. Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins is in 100% with this plan. He's going completely according to it. He's got the classes set up. We should be going to all the classes. How can we learn what to teach if we're not going to the classes and learning what to teach? We've got a really, really great influx of people that's coming here, and they're excited. Just as I was excited to move here, just as you all were excited to move here. They're excited. They're going to have problems. We've got to be able to solve them. We've got to have the knowledge of righteousness. We have to become teachers of righteousness. I have a quote that I want to leave you with today from the ninth book of Yisrayl Hawkins, part 2, and the sermon was 8/29/2009. He says, I love you, brothers and sisters. I know you're all facing a tough time, going through agony. I've been through it. I know what you're going through. Yahweh is with us. Don't fear. We're going to make it through this thing, and we're going to be known. We're going to be known by the world, not from the lies that have been told so far, but that Yahweh loves us. Praise Yahweh. If you all could please stand, I'm going to turn the services over to the next great teacher who is also training and preparing to be the teacher of righteousness.
Shabbat Shalom. You may all be seated. Thank you for tuning in to the Tala Women's Taste Station here. The title today for mine is called The Sky's Not the Limits If Your Father's Name is Yahweh. Keep that title in mind. I want to ask you, have you ever wondered why Yahweh doesn't give you the job you're great at? I'm telling you, that was my biggest shock when I came here. Because I went to college to become a teacher. Right place, right? The house of Yahweh. You want teachers? I'm a teacher. I studied in college. But no, that was not my first job. My first job was to assist with the dairy products. Whew, way off. Okay? But because I stuck with it, I realized that a college education cannot teach you that after they milk the cow, they separate the cream from the sweet milk, which then the cream is sent to be turned to make into butter, amazing liquid turned into a solid. How did you do that? And then, besides that, when after turning the cream, you take the butter out, then you got the buttermilk. Oh, that's what buttermilk is. Milk from making the butter. Oh, yeah, right. And then you have the sweet milk, but then you're always taught with a college education, look at the expiration date when you buy it from the supermarket, because when it is over, do not go past the expiration date. You may not drink that milk. Then pastor comes and says, did y'all enjoy that clabber milk we had at the cafeteria? Is that spoiled milk? No, it is not. The sweet milk, after it sits, the clabber, rises to the top. You got the whey at the bottom, which is very nutritious. Wow, just from assisting in dairy products, I've learned all of that. without having to pay thousands of dollars. Praise Father Yahweh. So you see, I'm kind of glad, it wasn't given to me to be a teacher right away, because I would have missed out on a lot of knowledge. But looking at that example, I ask again, you ever wonder why Yahweh doesn't give you the job you're great at? And the answer is, Yahweh knows you're already great at it. He will not limit your abilities because He has prepared you for a great gathering, a very great gathering. Yeshua asked a very important question in Matthew 11, verses 7 and 8. Matthew 11, verses 7 through 8. And this is look at this question as if He's asking you that question, okay? It's on page 737. Matthew chapter 11, verses 7 through 8. It says, when they left, Yeshua began to speak to the multitudes concerning Yochanan. Put your name there. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A flimsy reed, quaking in the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man, a woman, dressed in fine clothing? Behold, those who wear fine clothing are in the king's houses, not in Yahweh's houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet. Yes, I say to you, more than a prophet. More than a prophet. So what will the multitudes of people come and see? What will they see among us? What will they see? Now, speaking about Yochanan, let's go into another scripture, Matthew chapter 3, verses 4, just a few pages over. Matthew chapter 3, verses 4, because now we see why Yeshua really uplifted Yochanan. Chapter 3, verses 4. This Yochanan, Yahweh is merciful, wore a tallit of rough linen, and he was zealous for the laws of Yahweh, because he was trained to be a teacher, namely of the laws of Yahweh. The word train. When we train here in the house of Yahweh, yes, we know there are classes. We encourage everyone to come to the classes. But keep in mind that when you study, you read, wonderful wisdom and knowledge, it's just being book smart, right? This is why 1 Yochanan 3 comes in. That says, practice Yahweh's laws. That's why the other part of training, yes, we spoke about it today, is the tests and the trials. This is when you can actually start applying what you've learned in the classes. The Peace of Solution, booklet classes, prophetic words, everything. This is when you start applying it. And through the tests and trials, you become an expert. You become an expert because you practice what you learned. Yahweh doesn't want a bunch of I don't know nothing people. He wants experts at what we do. And Yahweh, He is so smart, so intelligent, so wise, not giving us what we're so great at and giving us things that we're not great at, because the best test, sisters, is when you have no clue what you're doing. When you hate it with a passion. After Yahweh promoted me from working in the dairy, I had to work with paperwork, and I hate paperwork. My supervisor, I tell her all the time, I just hate it. I hate drawing straight lines. Why can't I just do it on the computer? Why do I gotta use this ruler and just take my time making a line? But she's very neat. I was like, cool. Can I go back to doing the dairy? Because Yahweh gives you things that you hate with a passion. You gotta get your hands dirty. Oh, man. And then you got to force your carnal mind to go on mute. And then choose to obey willingly and do it with all your heart. Because that's all that matters. And through it all, you stick with it and you become an expert. You would know it. And Pastor is a definite great example of it. I'll never forget, back to the dairy stories, when I would turn the butter, and my sister and I was glad I got to work with my sister. And she knows when I try to cheat to try to warm up that cream, because it never turns out right. And she's like, well, Pastor's going to find out. Sure enough, he found out. Well, I know why y'all did not create enough butter from that cream. How did you warm up the cream? How did he know? Because he's an expert. He is an expert. But I want to remind you who your Father is, because my title says, the sky's not the limits if your Father's name is Yahweh. So, who's our Father? What is he all about? What are his expectations? Let's turn to page 431, Job 38, 1 through 18. I'm going to read this whole thing because I want you to remember who your Father is. Page 431, chapter 38. And read this when you're down on your tests and trials, so it reminds you. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens and obscures counsel with words void of knowledge? Right? We're not smart. Now stand up and prepare yourself like a man, like a woman, for I will question you and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined the dimensions of the earth, if you know? Who stretched the measuring line across it? Upon what are the foundations of the earth fastened? Who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of Yahweh shouted for joy, who shut the sea within doors? When it burst forth and came gushing from the womb, when I made the clouds as its garments and the thick darkness as its swaddling band, when I fixed limits for it and set it doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come, but no further, here is where your wild waves must stop. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, or shown the dawn its place? So it might take the earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it? Earth changes like clay, pressed under a sill, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked, their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you stepped into the springs of the sea? Have you walked in the recess of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell it if you know it all. So tell it. Can we put ourselves in Yahweh's position? We can't. With this amount of power Yahweh has, and the test that he placed us in, with this amount of power, would you say, is the sky the limit for your Father? No. So would he expect you to know so little, do so little, and prove so little? No. He would expect you to do so awesome, so big, and so great. So with every test and trial, we must pull through, because we will become that expert. We will be the guide. Because everything we put our hands to do, Yahweh will see that we will succeed. If If you all please stand, I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful teacher where the sky is not the limit for her.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. Please be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of us, and also those who are joining us over the media. Last Sabbath, our great overseer had a profound sermon. Do you think so? And the Sabbath before that, even more so. Last Sabbath in his sermon, throughout the scriptures that he read, he drew our attention to Jeremiah, and many of our young teachers use that scripture as well. He said, turn over with him to Jeremiah 23, and it is something that we know. Jeremiah 23, verse 1. He said, woe to the pastors, shepherds who destroy and scatter the flock, the seed, the tree, the plants, whatever you want to call them, who scatter the sheep of my pastures, says Yahweh. He said, it is Yada who is doing this. The overseer said, it's in your note, he said, this is Yada doing this. Who is destroying and scattering the sheep of Yahweh's pasture? He said, it is Yada who is doing this. And this is why I want to entitle my speech today, Yada the octopus. Why Yada the octopus? The great overseer has taken us many times to Genesis 49. He showed us everything going on that will be in the last days. So there we find Yada. In his sermon before last Sabbath, February 225, he said, no matter what the fancy diplomatic decisions that they're making in the world, Yada has the scepter. Yada is the one in control. Of course, Yahweh allowing Yada to control. Yada is the one with the scepter. Great house of Yahweh. The scepter that Yada is carrying, is it a righteous scepter? No. Yada is carrying the scepter of sodomy, fornication, bisexuality, whatever you want to call it, homosexuality, adultery, incest. You remember the pastor told us recently, if we look carefully, we can see they want to slide the incest in, and it's coming in, and the mother and the son and the so and the so, and I don't have to say it. Incest, you can check out what it means. Yada is carrying the scepter of war. Call it whatever war you want to, just war, terrible war, bad war, murder, killing, abortion. Who is doing this? Yada, displacement of women and children, innocent, Yada. Yada is carrying the scepter of bitterness, hatred, envy, pride. I'm not proud, I just know a lot. Malice. Yada is carrying the scepter of these things. Is that true or false, great house of Yahweh? So, the overseer has many, many times described the fact that they can do so much damage, destroy and scatter the sheep of Yahweh's pasture, is because Yada, as an octopus, he can use his tentacles. And he can spread those tentacles out throughout the nations and destroy. True or false? I have a short clip of an octopus, and just pay attention to how powerful the tentacles look. May we have the clip, please? Notice the suckers, or they also called suction cups, the white round things, suction cups that can really, well, you know. His tentacles are used for feeding, grabbing, touching things. Powerful. And you can imagine Yada, the octopus, uses those tentacles to go here, this place, over here, causing damage and destroying and scattering the sheep of Yahweh's pastures. Do you see it? Of course, octopus are nice. Yahweh created those. The description of what Yada can do. Now, did you know one of his tentacles have at least about 240 suction cups? If one tentacle has 240 suction cups or suckers, how many does the entire octopus have? All right, you got it. 8 multiplied by 240 is your answer. What's it? Very nice numbers. So, in each one of those tentacles, Yada also has a brain. So imagine each one going to its own place, destroying and scattering. So let's use my little octopus I got to show you. Let's say this tentacle, this one here, the UK, there's a parliament meeting, and they asked Mrs. Theresa May. The man said, Mrs. May, he said, I am not prepared to kill innocent women, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, innocent men, women, and children. Mrs. Theresa May, are you prepared to kill hundreds of thousands, innocent men, women, and children? And what did she say? She said, yes, a woman. The man said, I am not, but you are. Who is doing this? Yet not her, but what she has been taught, how she has been conditioned and cultured. So, when the scepter has changed hands and it's given to him whom tribute belongs to, what will we say to them? Mrs. May, Theresa May, let's take all the nuclear bombs that you want to use to kill all these people and let's turn them to plowshares. Plowshares. Are we ready to do this, great house of Yahweh? Are we getting prepared? So, over there, this one is for France. UK, United Kingdom. France over there, she's going over here. To the place where we have all displaced people, refugees. It is illegal to feed refugees. Did you see it on the news last week? It is illegal to feed refugees. A slice of bread, it is illegal to feed the refugees. Who is doing this? The great opposite said, it's Yada who is doing this. This one is going over here. So we have UK, France at the border over here. This one. It is staggering. It is staggering what Yada is doing to the baby boys and girls in the Philippines. It was on the news. And I sat there in my seat and I'm growling and grunting. It's staggering, the man said, what Yada is doing to the baby boys and baby girls in the Philippines. I asked at Abel, to the young Abels, I said, when it's more than staggering, what word could you use? He said, off the records. Off the records is what Yada is doing to baby boys and girls. So let's go back with me to the refugees. In France, this one here. Women and children, cold nights, freezing cold. Ma'am, how long have you sat there in this freezing cold temperature? I have sat here for 30 days. 30 days. 30 honey butter balls. When the scepter has changed hands, will we be ready to provide 30 butter balls? Because we have to heal them. Physically, emotionally, somebody said it here. We have to heal them. Honey butter balls, 30 for you. Do you have any children with you, ma'am? Sat in the cold, night after night. Yada. Yes, I have 8 children with me. 30 butter balls for each one, honey butter balls. That's 30 multiplied by 9. Don't tell the pastor I said that. So many honey butter balls to heal when the scepter has changed hands. Then let's come back to the United Kingdom, to the USA. Let's get some for the USA. The Supreme Court will now teach the people that sodomy is legal. The Supreme Court. Sodomy is legal. Okay, how are we going to do the bathrooms? Okay, clean, male, female, other. Okay, how do I know which one to use? Transgender. How do you feel today? Today I feel like a dog. Okay. If you feel like, remember it was on the news, if you feel like a boy, use the boy, even if you're a girl. And if you're a girl and if you're a boy and you feel like a, use the other bathroom. Do you see the good house of Yahweh? Who is doing this? So when the scepter has changed hands, if you go to Jeremiah 23 verse 1, it says, woe to them. And the great overseer said to us, it's Yada who's doing this. But go now to verse 6 and read me this, the first part. Just the first part right there says, but in his days, what will occur? It's right there. Yada will be saved. After all what Yada has done, in his days, Yada will be saved. Now, great house of Yahweh, let me ask you first, how many of Yada will be saved in his days? The overseer told us 144,000. In his days, after all the things, no food for the people, the sodomites in the bathrooms everywhere, everything is going chaotic in the world. In his days, Jeremiah 23 verse 6, Yada will be saved. Do we not serve an amazing, merciful, heavenly Father? The mummies and children we have to feed, the babies, the boys and the girls who we have to heal physically and emotionally. In his days, Jeremiah 23 verse 6, the first part, Yada will be saved. We serve an amazing creator. We serve a Father who knows what he's doing. He's a merciful Father. And he's wise and an expert. And so we end with Psalm 107, verse 1. It says, "Thank you, O great Yahweh, for you are righteous, and your mercy endures forever." Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh.
Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. And one of our speakers wanted me to finish her speech before I started mine. She forgot to tell you that on 2/28/17 was the day that Pastor announced to the cafeteria that he would be giving that free bread away. That's a very important part of her speech. So the title of my speech today is Gathering For or Gathering Against? Gathering for or gathering against? I felt a little guilty when I was hearing about the free bread because I didn't know I was the only one that's been getting free bread and butter and honey for almost 30 years. So I guess I'm kind of special because Pastor's been giving this bread of life to me for almost 30 years now. And I've been learning to refuse evil and to choose righteousness. So I've been getting it longer. So now we all get to enjoy. And I also learned that Yahweh doesn't always give us the job that we're great at. And so now that explains my office. Because I got to thinking when I came to the house of Yahweh, remember, I was a waitress for many, many years. I waited tables. And when I got put in an office, and I thought the filing cabinet was a place where I stored my lunch. So see, everything is starting to make sense now. But I'm here today to talk about this righteous gathering. And this gathering actually started way back in Genesis chapter 1. And I hope we all know that. Yahweh had a plan. And in this plan, he revealed his intention for creating mankind. And now, I'm sure everyone here knows what that is, right? Yahweh's intention for creating us. He is training us to guard and keep every aspect of his creation. That's why we're here. We're not here because of any other reason other than to train, to continue to guard and keep his creation. And this job was originally held by his sons. His evil sons, these gods, they had this job first. Now, look around you. Just kind of look around here right now. Because we are the ones that Yahweh is actually training to take this job that was left by these beings. Actually, they left this job. Are we ever going to leave our jobs, house of Yahweh? Okay, so you said no. Now, every time we're faced with these tests and trials, and Yahweh has to prove us, the reason that we're proven so heavily for this job in these last days is it's not a job for the faint-hearted. To guard and keep this creation is not going to be an easy task. There's going to be opposition that comes against, gatherings that come against us. Think about Moshe. Here Moshe did this great work and he was gathering out all these people and Yahweh was with Moshe. Was Yahweh with Moshe? And to think somebody had the nerve to say, who does Moshe think he is? He brought us out to die. I mean, in Egypt we had this and we had that, and now he's brought us out, and they started gathering against Moshe, did they not? But there were some who stayed and gathered with Moshe, true? Okay, now which ones were the ones who were successful in the end of that? Right. Keep that in mind. Now, what about Samuel? Here's Samuel, righteous priest of Yahweh. And what occurred with Samuel? Were they all just like gung-ho behind Samuel? Did anyone gather against Samuel? Oh yeah, they did. Remember all the elders of Israel. This is all Yada. One of our speakers brought out and showed that great visual of that octopus, right? But we, house of Yahweh, we're training to take that back. And in order to take that back, we have to be tested and we have to be tried. That's why things don't always go as planned at work, especially the greatest work on the face of this earth. Remember in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 21, Yahweh said, I have not sent these bozos, yet they ran. Do you remember that? Well, maybe bozos isn't in there. I think it says prophets. But they're not really prophets anyway, are they? Yahweh said, I have not sent these, yet what did they do? They ran. And then Yahweh said, I'm going to send one guy in these last days, and he's running, but who do the majority of the people run after? The one guy or these bozos? You guys, right on the ball. So they run after the bozos. So, see, it's really easy to follow the crowd to do evil, right? But the hardest thing is to gather and stand behind that one man that's doing the right thing, right? But that's our job. So Yahweh didn't send these, but he sends this man who has been sent, and this man has been given the job of gathering in a huge remnant in this time period. You know, house of Yahweh, you cannot even, your mind's eye cannot even imagine the amount of people that are going to be coming out of this great tribulation. Hopefully we can start to wrap our minds around it a little bit. But we can't be like the first sons of Yahweh and think that we're smarter than Yahweh or greater or smarter than our teacher. Yahweh knew what he was doing, and Yisrayl Hawkins has been trained in every aspect of this work. He knew to put a waitress in an office, to put a teacher churning butter, all the little jobs that he's given us. He knew to do that to bring us to perfection, for the perfecting of the saints, right? You know, I know it's difficult for me to go into the cafeteria because I want to jump in there and start working. But the only time that they allow me in there is to get my food to eat and take it back to the office and put it in the filing cabinet, right? But each one of us have been given a job, and Yahweh says, in that job, even though you don't know what you're doing, I'm going to bring you to perfection. And that's why when we can't ever judge somebody and say, you know, if I were frying that egg, I would do it this way. Or if I worked in that office, I would put the paper in the filing cabinet and not all over my desk, right? We can't do that because we're coming to perfection in our jobs, the way that Yahweh sees fit. It would be a lot easier if we could do the things that we're comfortable with, but Yahweh takes us out of the comfort zone as he gathers us. Now, the reason he does this is we have to be able to tell the ones that are going to be coming out of this great tribulation, it's okay. It's okay, Dr. So-and-so. I know this is a broom, and I understand that it doesn't look like a stethoscope, and you can't put it around your neck, and I don't want you to be trying to listen to anyone's heartbeat with it. Just see that dust on the floor? We're going to sweep it. No, let me tell you about the time when I came here as a waitress, right? And we're going to be able to share those experiences, and we're going to be able to say, even though I wanted to run on the other side of the counter when I went to the cafeteria, I stood in the place that the one that Yahweh sent in these last days put me, and I learned how to put the paper in the filing cabinet, right? Can we do this? See, there's a far greater work than anything that we're doing right here in the here and now. Yahweh gathers us to teach us obedience, and we have to prove to him that we're not going to be like his sons. No matter what, we are not going to leave our jobs. No matter what, right? Say it with me. No matter what, I'm not going to leave my job. Okay, so tomorrow when you're having a rough day, I want you to remember you said that. Hopefully we got that recorded. Do you see that microphone that's hanging right there? Great job. Okay. Now in Jeremiah 23 verses 3 through 8, if you'll turn there, Jeremiah 23, 3 to 8. I love this scripture, and it's been read a little bit today, so I'm sure you're very familiar with it. But I'm going to hit on it a little bit differently. Verse 3, Jeremiah 23:3. It says, I will gather the remnant of my flock out of the countries where they've been driven. Who drove them out there? The unrighteous shepherds have driven my people away, right? Driven out by the unrighteous shepherds, Yahweh's gathering them in. So he says, and bring them back to their folds, their homes, and they will be faithful and increase. And I will set up shepherds over them. But this is the part I want everyone in this house to see. And I will set up shepherds over them, the ones that are being gathered, captains over tens, captains over hundreds, captains over thousands. You are those captains right here. That's why Yahweh brought us out now in this time period. That's why he's gathered us first. First fruits of this harvest. First fruits, captains, shepherds. Now, let's continue to read. Verse 5. Behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will raise up to David a righteous branch. One that's going to teach these shepherds how to shepherd. Now, think about any area that you've been given and the uncomfortableness of the training program. You're learning to be that shepherd by the righteous branch that Yahweh knew. Yahweh knew that he was going to be the one to do it. He knows our strengths and he knows our weaknesses. And trust me when I say he's going to allow us to serve in the places that are going to strengthen us, get rid of our weaknesses, and help us to be these shepherds that Yahweh needs us to be when that remnant comes over to you, house of Yahweh, to us. Is this only exciting to me? They're coming from Tokyo. They're coming from Hong Kong. They're coming from Nigeria, Kenya, Italy. I mean, the calls are coming from everywhere, and they're coming over to us. And it says, this righteous branch, and a king will reign and succeed and will execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days, those who reverence Yahweh will be saved, and the called out ones will dwell safely. And this is the name that he will proclaim to them at Abel. Yahweh Tiskado, Yahweh our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought those children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. This work is going to far overshadow that work. And I said to Pastor the other day, I said, they're not even going to talk about the Exodus from Egypt anymore. Because this work is going to be so great, and Yahweh's bringing so many people out to us. And he said, yeah, but we're always going to talk about that work, because Moshe's work was a mighty work, and that is how we learned to do our work. And I was like, yes, we're going to talk about it. But they're going to be like, hey, you seen that last day's remnant? But we're always going to talk about Moshe, but they're going to be talking about us. And they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel into the protected place at Abel, from all countries where they had been driven, and they will dwell in their own land. This is the house of Yahweh in this time period. Everyone, please turn over to Genesis 49. Genesis 49. I want to read verse 10. Genesis 49, verse 10. And I'm going to read from the Book of Yahweh first. It says, the scepter will not depart from Yada, nor a ruling staff. That is the lawgiver. They are in charge right now. From between his feet until he comes to whom tribute belongs, and the obedience of the nation is his. Now, who's that talking about right there? Yeshua. Yes. So soon it's going to all be given over to Yeshua and pastor and, yes, the house of Yahweh. Now I want to read Genesis 49 verse 10 from the King James Version. It's a little bit different. Okay, it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him the gathering of the people. Now remember, the Book of Yahweh said obedience of the nations, right? But in the King James Version, it says gathering. So that kind of made my mind go, gathering. But when you look up that word, gathering, in the King James Version, it's word number 3349 in the Hebrew. And do you know that it means gathering in obedience? So, house of Yahweh, is it enough just to gather? I mean, they gathered against Moshe, they gathered against Samuel, they've gathered against Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins in this time period. Is it enough to just gather? No. We have to gather in obedience. Remember Hebrews 10? Do not forsake the gathering of yourselves together. On which day? You got it, that Sabbath day where you learn what to teach in obedience so that you can become a teacher teaching what you've learned. So remember, house of Yahweh, it's not enough to just gather. We have to gather in order to obey. And to obey is better than any sacrifice. So, what are we going to gather to do? Obey. And we listen to and obey the one sent that Yahweh has given us in this time period. Remember, Yahweh has given us one whom we can prove our loyalty to because he has definitely proved his loyalty to Great Father Yahweh and Yeshua. So praise Yahweh. May we strive to become these obedient, righteous servants and be able to be those shepherds that's spoken of in Jeremiah 23 and shepherd these nations when they come. And we will teach them obedience. Because remember, we are learning to gather. We are coming to be gathered so that we can learn to gather others. That's our main job. And it's been a righteous pleasure to be able to serve you this day in obedience to the Sabbath command. And at this time, we'd like to turn the services over to the great priest in the house of Yahweh. Praise Yahweh.